Now it's time for today's perspective guest. And if you think of your home and you're honest about it, how much stuff do you have? Now, by stuff, I mean not just things that you don't really need, but also things as well that you think of as essential. Well, of course, our ancient ancestors had none of these things, and yet they survived, even flourished. Well, with our oceans full of plastic and our land covered in rubbish, perhaps that is our problem. Well, my guest today is anthropologist Chip Colwell. He's author of the book So Much Stuff: How Humans Discovered Tools, Invented Meaning, and Made More of Everything. He's also editor-in-chief of Sapiens. It's a digital magazine about everything human, told through the stories of anthropologists. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme today. I suppose the obvious question to start with is just why do we have so much stuff?
We are surrounded by so many things in our lives, and that was the question that pushed me to write this book. Some years ago, my sister asked me that question: why do we have so many things in our lives? And I realized, as an archaeologist and a museum curator, I didn't really have a great answer for that. So I set out to discover why it is humans are so spectacularly strange in our relationship to things. And what I ended up doing is writing a book that tells a 3 million year story that goes back to the dawn of the origin of our species, where our most ancient ancestors didn't need a lot of things. They probably didn't need anything at all to survive. And yet here we are now, 3 million years later, where we are dependent on cars and airplanes and clothes and computers and houses and more plastics than anyone could have ever imagined. And so I proposed that there was 3 big leaps throughout our 3 million year history that led us to this moment.
It's very impressive to get it into one book if you're covering that timescale, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people would say that that's just progress. That's actually an achievement that the human race has done to make our lives better, building a house, buying a washing machine. But perhaps the consequences of that are a little harder to see.
Well, as an archaeologist, I am kind of reserving judgment in part for a lot of the story because it simply is our story. It's what our species has been through. And we began about 3 million years ago with a very simple discovery. And that discovery was that stones could be broken apart and you could cut things with them. And after that moment, you begin to have a symbiosis between tools and humans and our bodies. And so, for example, prior to stone cutting tools, we needed very sharp teeth. But once you're able to cut apart food, you actually don't need very sharp teeth anymore. So our biology actually began to shift in response to those tools. And from there, our next great leap was the creation of meaning, art, religion, money, and all the things that we use to capture our sense of our world and make meaning of it. And then lastly was our industrial revolution that began about 500 years ago. And even more importantly, the creation of an ideology of abundance, this notion that we need more things. We need more and more and more and more. And that was actually an agenda that was created through different marketing strategies in the early 20th century. And so it's kind of that, for me, it's that very last step that I begin to question whether or not we really need this ideology of abundance. Yes, we need things to survive. That's literally the definition of our species. But do we need so much stuff? That's the biggest question that I end up with in my book.
Because of the timeline is not enough, do you look ahead even to ask that question, if we carry on along this way, what the future holds for us and how bad it could be?
I think we're already seeing how bad it could be. You know, as you suggested in the introduction, our oceans are brimming with plastics and trash. By one estimate, we, as a species right now, deposit about 2 billion tons of trash in landfills every year. And by 2050, that's estimated to be 3.4 billion tons. So nearing twice as much in the next 30 years. So there's kind of no question that if you look at our current trajectory, we're headed to the precipice to a very dangerous period for our species. But as I've suggested in the book, that we have always changed our relationship to things over those last 3 million years. And so it's definitely possible, in my view, that we can change yet again. There's nothing destined in our relationship to stuff. We are the ones that get to decide.
Changing our relationship with it, I mean, that involves, doesn't it, stopping people buying stuff. That sounds incredibly difficult to do to me.
It is difficult, and yet you have throughout history all different kinds of sages and philosophers and everyday people that are trying and have found different ways to reduce the number of things in our lives. So you can go all the way back to ancient Greek philosophers who argued that we don't need to live with things or very few things, and that things are actually a way to pull us downwards as a species, to Buddhist philosophers and religious practices, to Christian minimalists, to modern day minimalists. So yes, it is going to be very hard to change our practices and our ideologies, but certainly there are examples in our past and today that demonstrate that living without things or living with few things is certainly a possibility.
Tell us how you make the book fun and interesting, because you take us to some fascinating places, don't you? An Italian cave housing the world's first painted art, a Hong Kong skyscraper where priestess channels the gods, a trash mountain, a rubbish mountain whose height rivals Big Ben.
A really fun part of this book was exploring these stories, because I genuinely set out to find answers. I really didn't have them when I began this book. And so I took kind of journalistic trips all over the world to try to understand this amazing 3 million year story of stuff. And so I went to places like Kumani, which is not too far from where I am right now in northern Italy, where for a time it held what was then understood to be the world's first art. This kind of stick figure painted in red ochre on a rock with kind of horns and large phallus and very mysterious, to a skyscraper in Hong Kong where I met a priestess, a Taoist practitioner who channels the gods through particular kinds of objects, to trash mounds and landfills to understand those practices. So the book is a 3 million year journey, but it's also a journey really around our world to understand humanity's broadest relationships to the things that we make, use, love, and hate.
And you've got 15 seconds to tell me you're optimistic for the future?
Cautiously. You know, we are at a very dangerous point, and so it is so necessary that all of us, from the way our society is organized to us individually, reevaluate our relationship to stuff.
Great to talk to you on the programme today. Thank you very much. Anthropologist Chip Colwell. He's author of the book So Much Stuff, How Humans Discovered Tools, Invented Meaning and Made More of Everything. Thanks very much.
Thank you.